Tonight, we are going to explore a very slow and boring history. This story is designed to help you relax, unwind, and gently fall asleep. So find a comfortable position, close your eyes, and let's begin. August 24th, 410. The date means nothing to most people today, but on that night, something broke in the world that has never been fully repaired. Rome's walls had stood for 800 years without an enemy passing through them. 8 centuries of assumed invincibility. Then Alaric arrived with his Visigoths, and in a single night, that assumption shattered. The gates opened. Some say through treachery, others say exhaustion. And the flood began. What followed weren't just 3 days of looting. History records the theft of gold, the taking of slaves, the humiliation of an empire. But there was another theft happening in those 72 hours. One that nobody counted. One that took far longer to understand. While soldiers were dragging silver plates from villas, something infinitely more valuable was disappearing into smoke and chaos. The libraries burned first. Not intentionally, perhaps. Fire spreads fast in a city built mostly of wood, even one decorated in marble. The papyrus scrolls ignited like kindling. Some held poetry, administration records, letters. But others held something different. Technical manuals, engineering treatises, medical texts, architectural specifications. The accumulated knowledge of an empire that had conquered the known world and taken its secrets. In the workshops of the Subura, bronze instruments melted in the flames. These weren't decorative pieces. They were precision tools, surgical equipment, surveying devices, calibrated measuring instruments that took generations to perfect. The craftsmen who made them fled or fell. Either way, the knowledge went with them. There's a specific kind of silence that follows catastrophe. It's not the absence of sound exactly. It's the absence of the sounds that should be there. In the days after Alaric left, Rome was full of noise. Wailing, reconstruction, the arguments of survival. But certain sounds were gone forever. The tap of stonemasons who knew how to cut marble to tolerances we struggle with today. The conversations in scriptoriums where engineers debated load-bearing calculations. The lectures in medical schools where physicians taught procedures that wouldn't be performed again for 1,500 years. Somewhere in those 3 days, an old engineer, perhaps in his 60s, perhaps older, tried to pass his knowledge to a younger man. Maybe it was about the exact mixture of volcanic ash and lime that made Rome's concrete special. Maybe it was the technique for tempering bronze so it held an edge. Maybe it was something we don't even know to ask about. The younger man probably nodded, probably tried to remember. But chaos is a poor classroom. Memory fails under stress. And when that engineer died, maybe that week, maybe that year, the knowledge died too. This happened thousands of times. In thousands of workshops, studies, building sites. Each time, a thread broke in a web of knowledge that had been woven over centuries. The official histories talk about Rome's fall as a political event. Emperors overthrown, territories lost, power fragmented. They're not wrong, but they're not complete. Rome didn't just lose political control that August. It experienced an intellectual apocalypse, the systematic destruction of knowledge infrastructure that took a millennium to accumulate. We call what followed the Dark Ages. The term itself suggests we know what happened: a dimming, a simplification, a forgetting. But what if that's not quite right? What if the darkness wasn't ignorance spreading, but knowledge being extinguished? What if medieval Europe wasn't primitive because people were less intelligent, but because they'd lost the instruction manuals? What if the Dark Ages weren't about forgetting how to read, but about losing technologies so advanced that even today, with all our science and computers and materials analysis, we still struggle to recreate them? That's the question that keeps historians up at night, and it's the question we're going to answer. But first, we need to understand exactly what was lost. What did Rome actually know? And why did it disappear so completely? Start with something simple. Concrete. You've seen it your entire life. Sidewalks, buildings, foundations. Basic building material. Invented relatively recently, refined through modern chemistry, improved over time as we've learned more about materials science. That's the story you were taught. Except Rome was making concrete 2,000 years ago, and theirs was better than ours. Not slightly better, not equivalent with some trade-offs, actually superior in ways that modern engineers openly admit they don't fully understand. Roman concrete doesn't just last longer than modern concrete. It actively gets stronger over time, especially underwater. Modern concrete exposed to seawater begins degrading within decades. Roman harbors built 2 millennia ago are still intact. The concrete still sound, still doing its job. We didn't discover this through ancient texts. We found out by accident. In 2017, researchers studying Roman maritime structures realized that seawater wasn't destroying the concrete. It was triggering a chemical reaction that created new crystalline structures in the material. The concrete was healing itself, growing stronger. 2,000 years later. Modern engineers still can't replicate this reliably at scale. We know the general principles now. We understand the chemistry. But knowing and doing are different things. The Pantheon sits in Rome with a dome that remains the world's largest, unreinforced concrete dome, larger than any modern concrete dome built without steel reinforcement. It's been standing for 1,900 years. The concrete at the top is lighter than the concrete at the base, suggesting Romans understood material science in ways that seem impossible for their time. They had hydraulic mining technology that could collapse entire mountains. They'd build aqueducts into mineral-rich ranges, then release massive volumes of water through tunnels they dug into the rock. The hydraulic pressure would shatter the mountain from inside, washing out thousands of tons of gold-bearing ore. The landscape at Las Medulas in Spain still looks alien from what they did there. They moved more earth than the volume of the Great Pyramid. Then we forgot how to do it for 1,500 years. Roman medical instruments discovered in Pompeii, preserved exactly where they were left when Vesuvius erupted, are virtually identical to modern surgical tools. The scalpels have the same blade angles. The forceps have the same mechanisms. Bone saws with similar tooth patterns. Speculums, catheters, tools for cataract surgery, not primitive approximations. Refined instruments that look like they came from a modern operating room. They had glass that allegedly could bend without breaking. Multiple ancient sources describe a craftsman demonstrating flexible glass to an emperor, who then had him executed and his workshop destroyed, so the material wouldn't devalue precious metals. True story or cautionary tale? We're not certain. But we do know Romans created glass with gold nanoparticles suspended in it at sizes between 50 and 100 nanometers. Technology we didn't redevelop until the late 20th century. The Lycurgus cup in the British Museum changes color depending on the light source because of these nanoparticles. We can see it. We can measure it. We still struggle to recreate it intentionally. Their aqueducts calculated water flow to within millimeters per kilometer over distances of 50 miles or more. Some still function today. The Aqua Virgo still supplies the Trevi Fountain. 2,000 years of continuous operation. None of this is fringe theory or alternative archaeology. These are documented facts that mainstream historians and scientists acknowledge. You can visit these structures. You can examine these artifacts in museums. Peer-reviewed research from MIT and Berkeley confirms the concrete's properties. The medical instruments are photographed and catalogued, yet somehow this knowledge sits in footnotes rather than headlines. We're taught that history is progress, that we build on what came before, always moving forward. But what if that's not true? What if we lost something extraordinary and spent more than a millennium just trying to get back to where Rome already was? The real question isn't whether these technologies existed. The evidence is overwhelming. The question is, how did Rome discover them in the first place? Rome didn't invent most of what made it extraordinary. It took what others had built, refined it, scaled it, and centralized it in a way no civilization had before. This wasn't primitive plundering. It was systematic knowledge extraction on an industrial scale. When Rome absorbed Egypt in 30 BCE, they weren't just securing grain supplies. They were accessing engineering principles that stretched back 3,000 years to the Old Kingdom. Egyptian architects had built structures that defied explanation. The precision of the Great Pyramid's construction, the astronomical alignments, the stonework tolerances. Roman engineers studied these monuments not as tourists, but as students. They brought Egyptian engineers back to Rome, sometimes as slaves, often as well-compensated experts. The knowledge transfer was deliberate and organized. Greece fell to Rome earlier, and with it came something even more valuable than architecture: mathematical principles, astronomical observations, hydraulic engineering, medical knowledge from Hippocrates and his followers. The Romans didn't just conquer Greek cities. They absorbed Greek thinkers. They brought scholars to Rome, established them in positions of influence, paid them to teach, to write, to consult on projects. When a Greek physician named Galen arrived in Rome, he became one of the most influential medical authorities in history. His knowledge came from centuries of Greek medical tradition. Rome provided the platform, the resources, the demand. But it went beyond Egypt and Greece. When legions marched into Hispania, engineers marched with them. Their job wasn't combat, it was observation. They studied Carthaginian mining techniques, documented local irrigation systems, mapped the engineering solutions that indigenous peoples had developed over centuries. These weren't casual observations noted in journals. These were technical surveys conducted by trained specialists. The Library of Apollo on the Palatine Hill became a repository for this accumulated knowledge. Engineering treatises from across the Mediterranean, agricultural manuals from Carthage, medical texts from Alexandria, architectural specifications from Athens. This wasn't a collection of literature, it was a technical database. The library held the concentrated expertise of dozens of civilizations spanning thousands of years. Rome's military campaigns served dual purposes. Territorial expansion, yes, but also knowledge acquisition. When Rome conquered Gaul, they studied Celtic metalworking. The Gauls had sophisticated techniques for producing iron and steel that Romans incorporated into their own methods. When they pushed into Germania, they encountered different building techniques adapted to colder climates, different approaches to forestry and timber construction. Always the engineers were there, watching, learning, documenting. This created something unprecedented. A single civilization that held the technical knowledge of the entire known world. Rome became a crossroads where an architect trained in Greek methods might collaborate with an Egyptian engineer, applying Carthaginian innovations to a project funded with Hispanian gold. But concentration creates vulnerability. Put all your gold in one vault and thieves have a single target. Store all your knowledge in one civilization, and if that civilization falls, everything goes with it. When Rome collapsed, it wasn't just Roman discoveries that vanished. It was Egyptian mathematics preserved in Alexandrian libraries. It was Greek medical knowledge maintained in Roman schools. It was Carthaginian engineering kept alive through Roman practice. It was mining techniques from Hispania, metallurgy from Gaul, architectural principles from a dozen cultures, all filtered through and preserved by Roman institutions. The wisdom of the ancient Mediterranean world, accumulated over 3,000 years from dozens of civilizations, depended on Roman infrastructure to survive. The libraries, the schools, the workshops, the master-apprentice systems, the funding, the demand. When those systems broke, the knowledge scattered like light through a shattered lens. Some fragments survived. Many didn't. This is why Rome's fall was so catastrophic for human knowledge. It wasn't one culture losing its innovations. It was the collapse of a civilizational repository that held secrets from empires that no longer existed to preserve them independently. Now that we understand how Rome accumulated this knowledge, we can begin to explore what was lost. And we start with the technology that even modern science struggles to explain. The concrete that should have crumbled 2,000 years ago, but instead grows stronger with every passing century. Stand inside the Pantheon on a clear afternoon, and you'll understand why some mysteries refuse to stay buried. Light pours through the oculus, that perfect circular opening at the dome's apex, and falls in a solid column to the floor below. The shaft of light moves across the interior as the day progresses, illuminating different sections of the ancient space, revealing and concealing in turn. The dome above you spans 142 feet. No pillars support it. No steel reinforcement holds it together. Just concrete, poured nearly 1900 years ago, still performing exactly as intended. Still bearing its own weight without complaint, without compromise, without the hairline fractures that would terrify modern structural engineers. When engineers in the 1950s finally got permission to study the Pantheon properly, they brought their instruments, their calculations, their confidence. They measured, analyzed, modeled. Then they encountered a problem. According to their mathematics, the dome shouldn't exist. The span was too large. The concrete too heavy. The structure should have collapsed under its own weight centuries ago, if not during construction itself. But there it stands. And the engineers, eventually, had to adjust their assumptions about what was possible. Look closer at the dome, and you'll notice something subtle. The concrete changes as you move from base to apex. At the bottom, it's heavier, denser, mixed with travertine and brick fragments. As your eyes travel upward, the concrete becomes lighter. At the top, near the oculus, it's made with pumice, volcanic rock full of air pockets. The entire dome is a gradient of carefully calibrated densities. This wasn't accident or luck. Romans understood that different parts of the structure experienced different stresses. They adjusted their mixture accordingly, creating a dome that distributed weight precisely, perfectly. This kind of material science sophistication wasn't supposed to exist in the ancient world. Yet here it is, overhead, undeniable. The pour itself raises questions nobody has fully answered. The dome was cast in a single continuous operation. No seams, no joints where different pours meet. That means coordinating hundreds of workers, maintaining quality control over massive quantities of material, ensuring consistency throughout the entire process. One mistake, one bad batch of concrete, one lapse in precision, and the whole project fails. They didn't have computers to model stress patterns. They didn't have chemical analysis to verify mixture ratios. They had knowledge, experience, and a level of organizational capability that makes modern project managers uncomfortable. But the Pantheon, impressive as it is, represents just one application of Roman concrete technology. The real mystery emerges when you look at their maritime structures, the harbors, breakwaters, and ports that sustained an empire. At Caesarea, Portus, by eye, Roman concrete sits underwater, has been underwater for 2,000 years, constantly exposed to salt water, wave action, chemical erosion, everything that destroys modern concrete in decades. Engineers who study underwater infrastructure know that concrete in seawater has a limited lifespan. 50 years is good. 100 is exceptional. 2,000 is impossible. Except it isn't impossible. It's there, still intact, still functional in some cases. Modern scientists have taken samples, analyzed them in laboratories, published findings in peer-reviewed journals. MIT, Berkeley, institutions with reputations to protect. And what they found doesn't make sense according to what we think we know about materials science. Roman maritime concrete doesn't decay, it strengthens. Over time, seawater infiltration triggers a crystallization process that actually reinforces the material. The concrete heals itself, grows denser, becomes more durable with age. Modern concrete does the opposite. Seawater breaks it down, creating cracks that widen, weaknesses that compound, eventual catastrophic failure. This isn't ancient astronaut speculation or fringe archaeology. This is documented, measured, confirmed reality that challenges our assumptions about technological progress. The Romans built structures that outlast our best modern equivalents, not by a little, by orders of magnitude. So what made their concrete different? The answer lies not in what they added, but in what they didn't know they were creating. A chemical reaction that modern science only discovered by accident in 2013. The formula seems simple when you first hear it. Volcanic ash from Pozzuoli Bay near Naples. Lime, seawater. Mix in the right proportions. Pour, wait. That's the recipe dozens of ancient texts mention, the one that's been available to historians for centuries. So why couldn't anyone recreate it? Because recipes lie. Or rather, they tell the truth incompletely. A recipe for bread tells you flour, water, yeast, salt, but it doesn't tell you the feel of properly kneaded dough, the subtle signs that fermentation has progressed far enough, the way good bread sounds when you tap the crust. That knowledge lives in hands and experience, passed from baker to apprentice through demonstration and repetition. Roman concrete was the same. The text told what to mix, but not how to mix it. Not the precise ratios, not which specific volcanic ash, from which specific location, not the timing, or the temperature, or the 100 small details that separated adequate concrete from the extraordinary material that could last millennia. The magic happens at the molecular level, in spaces too small to see without modern electron microscopes. When seawater penetrates Roman concrete, and it does, slowly, over decades and centuries, it encounters the volcanic ash particles. A chemical reaction begins. Rare crystals start forming. Aluminum tobermorite, a mineral so uncommon in nature that geologists get excited finding small samples. These crystals grow in the tiny voids and cracks within the concrete matrix. They fill gaps. They bind loose particles. They create new structural connections stronger than what was there before. The concrete doesn't just resist decay. It actively repairs itself, slowly, continuously growing more robust with each passing year. Modern concrete works differently. Portland cement, invented in the 1800s, creates a different chemical structure. Strong initially, but vulnerable to seawater. Salt infiltration breaks down the bonds, creates expansive pressures, widens cracks. The process accelerates. What starts as microscopic weakness becomes visible damage, becomes structural failure. We know this now because scientists in 2013, studying samples from Roman harbors, finally figured out what was happening. They identified the tobermorite crystals, traced the chemical pathways, understood the self-healing mechanism. Knowledge that was obvious to Roman engineers became cutting-edge research in the 21st century. But knowing why something works and knowing how to make it work are different challenges entirely. Scientists can produce Roman-style concrete in laboratories. They can control conditions, source the right materials, create small batches with the desired properties. Scaling that to industrial production is another matter. The volcanic ash matters. Not just any volcanic ash. The specific pozzolana from certain deposits with particular mineral compositions. The proportions matter. precise enough that slight variations produce different results. The mixing process matters, the curing time, the ambient conditions. Our entire modern construction industry is built around Portland cement. Switching would mean retooling factories, retraining workers, rewriting building codes, establishing new supply chains. Sometimes losing knowledge means losing more than information. It means losing the infrastructure, the economic systems, the institutional frameworks that made the knowledge useful. Roman concrete wasn't just a formula. It was an industry, quarries, transportation networks, skilled labor pools, quality standards, inspection systems, master craftsmen who trained apprentices over years. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed, the building economy collapsed with it. No major public works projects meant no demand for specialized concrete. No demand meant no reason to maintain the supply chains or train new workers. The guild system that preserved craft knowledge dissolved within a generation. By 600 CE, maybe sooner, the last master who knew the exact formulas was dead. The knowledge died too. Medieval builders knew Romans had accomplished impressive things. They could see the structures, walk inside them, recognize the scale and ambition. But they assumed it was better craftsmanship, more labor, superior organization. They didn't realize the Romans were working with fundamentally different materials. The concrete itself was different at the molecular level. Without that understanding, replication was impossible. We rediscovered the secret 1500 years after it was lost, and we're still working on bringing it back. Some knowledge, once broken, doesn't reassemble easily. The Portus Harbour complex sits northwest of Rome. Mostly buried now, its ancient waterways filled with centuries of silt. But under the earth and water, Roman concrete endures. This was Rome's lifeline, the artificial port that received grain ships from Egypt, the logistics hub that fed 1 million people. The harbour's breakwaters stretch for thousands of feet. Massive concrete structures poured directly underwater 2,000 years ago. Modern engineers look at Portus and see something that shouldn't work. Pouring concrete underwater is challenging, even with contemporary technology. You need cofferdams or caissons to create dry working areas, pumps to keep water out, careful curing conditions to ensure proper hardening. Romans apparently skipped most of that. They developed a hydraulic concrete that could set and strengthen while completely submerged in seawater. The breakwaters are still there, still intact despite 2 millennia of wave action, storms, salt exposure, everything that destroys modern maritime concrete within decades. The concrete hasn't just survived, it's thrived. Those tobermorite crystals forming and reforming, the structure actually gaining strength from the seawater that should have destroyed it. Compare this to modern ports. Engineers expect underwater concrete to last maybe 50 years in good conditions. 100 years is exceptional, requiring careful maintenance and favorable circumstances. The concrete at Portus has outlasted 50 generations of modern concrete 20 times over. And it's not alone. Walk to the Trevi Fountain in Rome, and you're watching water flow through concrete channels that have been working continuously for 2,000 years. The Aqua Virgo aqueduct still carries water from its source to the fountain, following the path Roman engineers calculated with precision, measured in millimeters per kilometer, over distances of miles. The concrete conduits show where, certainly, algae growth, calcium deposits, but no structural degradation, no catastrophic failures requiring complete replacement. Just steady, reliable function across 20 centuries. Think about that time frame. 2,000 years ago, the Roman Empire was approaching its peak. Jesus had been dead for barely a generation. The aqueduct built then is still doing its job now, with most of its original concrete intact. What infrastructure are we building today that will function in the year 4000? Or consider the baths of Caracalla, massive public bathing complexes where thousands gathered daily. The concrete vaults span spaces large enough to echo, wide enough that you instinctively look for support pillars that aren't there. These baths operated with extreme temperature variations: hot water, cold water, steam rooms, heated floors. Concrete expanding and contracting with thermal cycles, day after day, year after year. Modern concrete cracks under such stress. Thermal expansion creates pressure. Cracks form. Water infiltrates. Freezing and thawing widen the damage. Eventually, catastrophic failure. Engineers design modern structures with expansion joints, steel reinforcement, careful temperature management to minimize thermal stress. The baths of Caracalla had none of that. Just concrete, performing flawlessly under conditions that should have destroyed it. The engineering implications extend beyond durability. Romans could build thin shell vaults, concrete arches and domes with remarkably slender profiles. Modern engineers need steel reinforcement to achieve similar spans. Without it, the concrete is too brittle, too prone to cracking. Roman concrete apparently wasn't. They created monolithic structures that behaved like single pieces of stone, distributing loads evenly, handling stress without the failure modes that plague contemporary concrete. These weren't experimental prototypes. These were industrial-scale projects repeated across the empire. Hundreds of harbors, thousands of aqueducts, countless buildings and baths and bridges, all using consistent methodology, standardized materials, reliable techniques. That level of quality control suggests sophisticated understanding of materials science, not luck or trial and error. When this knowledge vanished, European building technology didn't just stagnate, it regressed. Medieval cathedrals are magnificent, but they're built with stone masonry because no one remembered how to make Roman concrete. The techniques, the materials, the underlying principles, all forgotten. It took until the 1800s to develop Portland cement, and even that represents different chemistry, different properties, different engineering approaches. In some ways, we still haven't caught up. We can build taller, certainly, larger, but 2,000 years from now, our structures will be dust. Roman concrete will still be standing, still getting stronger, still defying our assumptions about what's possible. If Roman concrete seems impossibly advanced, wait until you learn about Roman glass. Specifically, the type of glass that could bend without breaking, and then disappeared so completely that we're still not sure it ever existed.